Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis, 55b of Masechus Kiddushin. We are starting 4 lines down the page. Second word on the line is Amar Mar, the Master said. The Master said means we're quoting a previously quoted Mishnah or Brisa. In this case, the Gemara is going to be examining the Mishnah that was quoted at the top of Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis 55a, the Mishnah from Shkalim, which is what we primarily discussed in the last Amud. And that Mishnah had said that if a person finds an animal wandering outside but near Yerushalayim, they have to assume that there's a likelihood at least that that animal was actually an animal that was designated for a carbon, for an offering. And what the Mishnah actually said was that Zecharim, if you find male animals, so they're olos, you should bring them as elevation offerings. And in the kevos, and if it's a female, so then zivchei shlamim, then you assume that it is a shlamim, a peace offering. And the Gemara had certain problems with that. First of all, it said if it's a male, it could also be a shlamim. So how could you just bring it as an ola? Maybe it was a shlamim. So the Gemara actually ended up rejecting the whole notion that you're bringing this animal that you find as a carbon, and the Gemara had 2 different approaches. One was the approach of Rav Oshia. Rav Oshia understood that what you are doing is switching that animal for money, redeeming it for money. The animal becomes chulin, and it becomes deconsecrated, and you use the money to buy the necessary karbanos, and the truth is, he says, that for the male, you have to buy both a carbon ola, an elevation offering, and a carbon shlamim. Even though it said just ola in the Mishnah, it meant even ola. You have to buy a shlamim and an ola. And if it's a female, then you just buy a shlamim. That was Rav Oshia's approach. And Rabbi Yochanan had a problem with that. He said, how can you just deconsecrate it? That's forbidden. You can't just, deliberately deconsecrate and profane an animal that's dedicated as a carbon. So Rabbi Yochanan said, you wait till it gets a mum, you wait till it gets a blemish, it's no longer able to be brought as a carbon, and then you switch it actually for an animal itself. And he understood also that for a male you would switch it for 2 carbonos, one that you would bring as a ola and one as a shlamim, and for a female you'd switch it for a shlamim. And one more important point is that when you're bringing 2 karbanos, in either opinion, whether you're using money or whether you're flipping it for animals, what you would do is you would make a tanai, you make a condition, and you would say that this animal that I'm replacing, so if indeed it was an ola, then my ola will replace it, and my shlamim will be a voluntary shlamim. And if it was a shlamim, then my shlamim will replace it, and my ola will be a voluntary ola. Okay, so that was what we discussed last week, and that brings us to the 4th line of Nun Hey Amud Beis. The Gemara says, Amar Mar. So the Master said, Zecharim olos. If it's a male, you just bring it as, you only have to replace it with an ola, and a shlamim, like we said. Dilma todahi. But maybe it's a carbon toda. There's another carbon it could be. It could be that it was designated as a toda, a Thanksgiving offering. So, says the Gemara, you're right, Demaisi nami toda. You also have to bring a toda, a Thanksgiving offering. So we're now up to 3 karbanos to replace this one carbon that this person happened to find outside of Jerusalem. The Gemara asks, V'habaya lechem. But if it's a toda, then there are required loaves, 40 loaves that are brought, different kinds, but that are brought with a carbon toda. So you have to do that too. So says the Gemara, yeah, Demaisi nami lechem. You also bring lechem. You also bring the loaves. The Gemara asks, "V'dilma ashamhu." Maybe the animal was a carbon asham, a guilt offering. Now here, it can't say, "Oh, he also brought a guilt offering," because you can't bring a voluntary asham. So in the event that the animal wasn't an asham, then what are you doing? You could, if it was an asham, then you could replace it with another asham. But if it wasn't, then you can't just bring a voluntary asham. All the other ones that we mentioned up till now, you could bring voluntarily. You could bring a voluntary ola, you could bring a voluntary shlamim, you could bring a voluntary toda, but you can't bring a voluntary asham. So what are we going to do about that? Says the Gemara, Asham ben shtei shanim. Vishtakach ben shana. An asham always comes from an animal that is 2 years old. The animal that's brought for an asham is an animal that is 2 years old. At least many types of ashams, many guilt offerings. Rashi mentions an asham for gezela and me'ila, stealing and misappropriating hektish, and other cases. And it's so there you bring a 2-year-old animal, and the case that the Mishnah here that we're discussing will be dealing with was where the animal was only 1 year old. So it can't be that it was an asham because it's not old enough to be an asham. That's what we'll assume the case was. V'dil asham mitzorahu. But maybe it was the asham that a mitzora brings. A mitzora, somebody who gets tzaras, brings a carbon asham as part of his purification process. Or asham nazirhu. Or maybe it's the carbon asham of a nazir. A nazir also brings a carbon asham. So, and those are within even 1-year-old animals. So if we're talking about 1-year-old animals, then maybe it's that kind of asham. What are you going to do about that? So the Gemara says, lo shlichi. That's not common. And if it's not common, meaning what are the chances that this animal was from someone who got tzaras or from a nazir? Those are rare cases. We're not going to have to be choshesh. We don't have to be concerned for those cases. V'dil pesachu. But maybe the animal was from a carbon pesach. So you should be concerned about that. So the Gemara says no, because Pesach bismano mizar zehiribe. If it's the time of the carbon pesach, so it's right before Pesach time when you bring the Pesach offering, people are very careful to watch their animals. You don't have to worry that this is a Pesach offering that got away. V'shelo bismano, if the Pesach has already passed and you're concerned that it was a Pesach offering that I guess got away, so and now it's after Pesach, or after the Erev Pesach, it's after the time of bringing the carbon Pesach, so then shlamim, then it transforms into a shlamim, into a peace offering, and you're already taking care of that. Ask the Gemara, V'dila b'charu meiser ninhu. But maybe this animal is a carbon b'charos, or a carbon meiser behema. So a firstborn animal is brought as a carbon and given to the Kohanim. Every 10th animal is meiser behema, is also brought as a carbon. There the meat is eaten by the owners. But maybe it's one of those. And so what are you going to do about that? And you can't trade it for another animal because you can't replace the firstborn with another animal that's not a firstborn. And you can't replace a tithed animal with another animal that's not tithed. And if it is tithed, then it needs to be its own carbon. So it can't be that he's just replacing them. That you can't answer, he also brought another bechar. Well, that won't work. You can't trade a bechar, a firstborn, for a not firstborn. So the Gemara says, Lamai hilchasa, but what difference would it make? Let's say it is a bechar or from Meiser or from Meiser behema. Limechlinu b'muman. All that difference what it would make is if it is one of those animals, then you have to wait till it gets a mum, till it gets a blemish, and then you'd be able to consume it, and there's no redemption of it, and you would just consume it. Well, hachinami b'muma misachi. Well, that's what you're going to do here anyways. You're going to eat it once it gets a mum. That was Rabbi Yochanan's solution, at least. Maybe this works better in Rabbi Yochanan, but Rabbi Yochanan's solution was wait till the animal gets a mum and then flip it for the other animals. So if it gets a mum, if it turned out it was one of these two, either a firstborn or a tithed animal, then at that point it's permitted to eat, which is what he is going to do anyways. So it's no problem if it was one of those. Okay, so that's with regards to if you find a male. Now the Gemara discusses the part of the Mishnah that talked about if you find a female. Amar, so the Mishnah said, Nekevos zivchei shlam. If you find a female, so you bring it, or you bring a replacement of it as a carbon shlamim, a peace offering. Ask the Gemara, Dilma Todahi. But maybe it's a carbon toda. A Thanksgiving offering can also be from a female animal. So that's fine. Demaisi toda. You're right, you have to bring a toda also, just in case. V'ha ba'inan lechem. but with the carbon total, there's loaves. There's 40 loaves, like we mentioned before. Okay, demaisi nam yilachem. You also have to bring the bread, the loaves. Ask the Gemara, v'dilma chatasi. But maybe it's a carbon chatas, a sin offering. And a carbon chatas is from a female, and it can't be replaced. So you can't just switch it. So what are you going to do if it's a carbon chatas? So the Gemara answers, chatas bashnasa, v'shtakach bash shtei shanim. We'll answer, similar to what we did for the asham before, we'll say that a chatas has to be from an animal that's 1 year old. And the case could be that he found a female animal that was 2 years old. So previously we said by the asham has to be 2 years old, and he found a male animal that was 1 year old. The chatas has to be 1 year old. So we'll say the case is that he found an animal that was 2 years old. Ask the Gemara, v'dilma chatas sha'avra shnasa. But maybe it's a chatas that the year passed, meaning if it's true a chatas has to be 1 year old and you found an animal that was 2 years old, but maybe it used to be a chatas and just wasn't brought in time, and it's too old to be brought as a chatas, but such an animal, we'll see in a moment what you have to do with it, but you can't bring it as a carbon and you can't flip it for another animal. Maybe it's a chatas that turned 2 and it was too late to bring it. Says the Gemara, lo shchiach. That's not common. We don't have to be concerned for that, because what's the likelihood that this animal was a chatas that wasn't brought in time? Okay, fine. So we're saying the case is that you found an animal that was 2 years old, and therefore you don't have to be concerned it's a chatas. Ask the Gemara, ishtakach bashna samai. But what if you did find a female animal that was only 1 year old? And there is a concern that it was a chatas. What are you going to do then? So Tanya, we have a brisa. Chananya ben Chachinai Omer. Chananya ben Chachinai says, Eiz bashanasa lichatas. If you find an eiz, a goat that's 1 year old, you bring it as a chatas. Ask the Gemara, lechatas salka daitach? You think you just bring it as a chatas? What if it's not a chatas? What if it's not a chatas? Then what are you going to do? And you can't bring it as a nedava. You can't just, the point earlier that I meant to say is that you can't just bring another animal instead just in case, because if it turns out, you could bring it, if you knew it was a chatas and you had to bring another animal instead, that could work. But if you don't know it's a chatas, so you can't just bring another animal instead just in case, because if it turns out it wasn't a chatas, then what's that? That's a voluntary chatas. You can't bring a voluntary chatas. So that's not an option. So how could this brisa say that if you find a 1 year old eiz, a 1 year old goat, you bring it as a chatas? If it wasn't a chatas, then you are then replacing it is a problem, because you can't bring a voluntary chatas. So Elam Rabbi, so rather Rabbi says ki chatas. What he means is you treat it like a chatas, meaning konsa lekipa v'mesa melea. You put it in a kippah is like a pen, and it dies on its own. So the halacha is that a carbon chatas, a sin offering that that for whatever reason you're not able to bring, is left to death, is left to die. So that's what you're going to have to do here, because if you find a 1 year old goat, you don't know if it's a chatas or not. I guess there's no other options of what it might be. Perhaps, maybe there are. I'm not sure about that. But you have to be concerned that since it's 1 year old, there might be a chatas, and therefore the animal itself has to be treated like a chatas, or a safek chatas. Chatas might be in doubt. It's a chatas that you can't bring though, and therefore it's left on its own to die. Okay. Now the Gemara turns to a different angle, different discussion, and it says, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Ein lokchem behema b'mos meiser sheni. You're not allowed to buy an animal with your meiser sheni money, your second tithe. So just a reminder, meiser sheni is the tithe that you have to use the money, you tithe your produce, and you're supposed to bring that produce to Yerushalayim and consume it there. If you don't want to schlep it to Yerushalayim, you can redeem the produce for money. So now, and then you have to bring the money to Yerushalayim and buy something in Yerushalayim there. So what if instead of buying something in Yerushalayim, you want to take the money and buy an animal here and bring the animal to Yerushalayim? So the Gemara, this price says, no, you can't do that. You can't take the money and buy an animal to bring to Yerushalayim. Rashi gives two reasons why. One is because the pasuk says that you have to bundle up the money and bring the money to Yerushalayim. The other reason he says is because it might be too hard for you to bring the animal all the way to Yerushalayim. So we say don't buy an animal outside of Yerushalayim. You could buy it once you get there. That's one of the options of what to buy, but you can't buy it outside of Yerushalayim. Top of the next page it says V'im Lakach. What if he did buy one? What if he did buy an animal with Meiser Sheni? So Bishogeg, if he did it by accident, meaning he didn't realize that the money was Meiser Sheni money, so Yachzir Damim L'Mekoma. So then the money goes back to its place, meaning the sale is nullified, it's a Mekach Tos, he didn't realize it was Meiser Sheni, it's not a good sale. But B'mezid, but if he deliberately used Meiser Sheni to buy the animal, Tale v'tocha b'makom. So then he has to. Then the sale is good, and he has to bring the animal to Yerushalayim when you get there. It's a shlep, but that's what he has to do. Amar Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says, "Bamed dvarim amurim." When is this true? That you have to. That the sale will be good and you'll bring it to Yerushalayim. When is that true? B'miskavein v'lakach tchila l'shem shlamim. That's if. Or when you bought the animal with the intent to bring it as a carbon shlamim in Yerushalayim. Because that's what they normally did with Meiser Sheni. They bought an animal, they brought it as a shlamim, a peace offering, and then they ate the meat, because the owners eat the meat from the carbon shlamim. So he says, when we say that if you bought it on purpose, you can still bring it to Yerushalayim, that's if you bought it with the intent to bring it to Yerushalayim and bring it as a carbon shlamim. Aval b'miskavin lahotzimos Meiser Sheni l'chulin. But if your intent was to take your Meiser Sheni money and flip it basically for an animal that would be chulin, that would be mundane, that would be deconsecrated, not a carbon, so then bein shogeg, bein mezid, yachzeru damin limkomam. So then it doesn't matter even if you bought it on purpose, whether you bought it by accident like we said before, or even if you bought it on purpose, the sale is null and void. The sale does not work. And that's a knas, that's a fine that the Chachamim gave, the rabbis gave, to someone who would use his Meiser Sheni money to try to flip it and release it to become deconsecrated. Now, the money itself, what would happen in that case, if a person used Meiser Sheni to buy an animal, so then the seller now would have Meiser Sheni on his hands, and he would have to take that money up to Yerushalayim. So, and in fact, this that we say that the sale is nullified is as much a knas, a fine against the seller here, right? The seller, he sold an animal and he got money instead, and we're making him give back the money and take back his animal. So that's a fine as much against the seller as against the buyer. So, but that's the halacha. So the halacha is, says Rabbi Yehuda, that if a person took Meiser Sheni money and deliberately bought an animal, if he deliberately bought a shlamim, so first of all, you're not supposed to do that. But if you did, outside of Yerushalayim, you're not supposed to buy the animal outside of Yerushalayim. Let's say you did. So if it was for the purpose of bringing it as a carbon, so then you bring it to Yerushalayim and you bring it as a carbon, as a shlamim, and you eat the meat. But if he did it for a and in that case, one more point, in that case, the money, which was the Meiser Sheni money, will transfer its Kedusha to the Shlamim. The Shlamim will now be the Meiser Sheni, because that will be consumed in Yerushalayim, which is great. I mean, it's good enough. But if he deliberately bought a non-carbon, he took his Meiser Sheni money, bought just an animal, so then the Meiser Sheni keeps its Kedusha. the seller, now has the Meiser Sheni that needs to be brought to Yerushalayim, the money, the cash, and the seller just has an animal. So then Rabbi Yehuda said, null and void, we cancel that sale. Ask the Gemara why. V'ha'anan tanan. But we learning a Mishnah, back on Beis 52b. We talked about what happens if a man tries to betroth a woman with Meiser Sheni. And it came down to a machlokas of what's the status of Meiser Sheni. Who owns it? Is it Mammon Gavoa? Does it belong to is it God's money, God's property, or is it the persons themselves? So Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that it belongs to you, it belongs to the person, and therefore if a man betroths a woman to Meiser Sheni, it works. So ask the Gemara, but we learn in a Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, B'mezid Kiddush. If a man used Meiser Sheni and gave Kiddushin, it works. So, why? Shouldn't that be similar to this case, where a person bought an animal with Meiser Sheni money, and he now who has the Meiser Sheni money? The seller. Well, apparently we're concerned that the seller is not going to treat that money properly, and he's not going to bring it to Yerushalayim, and that's why we say cancel the whole thing. But if that's the case, if we have such a concern, then we should have the same concern by Kiddushin. If a man gives a woman Kiddushin for Meiser Sheni money, we should be concerned. She now has the Meiser Sheni money. Maybe she's not going to use it properly and bring it to Yerushalayim. So why do we let the Kiddushin be good, but we don't let a sale be good? So Rabbi Elazar said, Isha Yoda Shemos Meiser Sheni Mischal al Yada. A woman knows that through the Kiddushin, that's not going to deconsecrate the money. She knows the money will still maintain its Kiddusha, would maintain its status of Meiser Sheni. And she'll go up and consume it in Yerushalayim. So by the woman, we're not concerned that she's going to think that it lost its Kedusha of Meiser Sheni. However, in the case of the behemoth, of the animal that's sold, so there's a concern that the buyer may not realize that it keeps its status as Meiser Sheni when it's flipped for an animal. Maybe because there it's being flipped for an actual animal, and or the way Rashi actually learns is there's a different concern. The concern is that we give a knas, we give a fine to the seller because he is transgressing lifnei iver. He is putting a stumbling block in front of the buyer. The buyer bought this animal. He knows the buyer isn't planning to bring it to Yerushalayim, and that means so the way Rashi learns is he knows actually that the kedusha does transfer to the animal. He understands that in the case of selling an animal, it will transfer to the animal, but but there's a concern that the buyer is not planning to bring that animal to Yerushalayim because he didn't buy a shlamim. He didn't buy it for a shlamim. He just bought an animal that he plans to keep as deconsecrated, and the seller is involved in lifnei iver, in putting a stumbling block in front of him because he's now going to consume this animal. The buyer is going to consume the animal outside of Yerushalayim. So therefore, we give a kanas. We say no sale at all. So Maskif lo Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah asked a question on this. He said, "Vari behema tameya, avadim v'karkos." But a non-kosher animal, slaves and land, de'adam yodeh shemos meiser sheni mischal alen. There, everybody knows that the meiser sheni kedusha will not transfer to those items because you can't consume them in Yerushalayim because it's not kosher food or it's not food. It's a slave. It's a land. So those items, if a person would use Meiser Sheni to purchase any of them, again, either a non-kosher animal or a slave or land, so everybody knows that the kedusha doesn't flip to it, and yet we have a Mishnah. You're not allowed to buy any of those things with the money from Meiser Sheni. Even in Yerushalayim. even in Yerushalayim. V'im lakach, and if somebody did buy one of them, yochal kenegdan. What he would have to do is take his own money and redeem it for the money that he used to purchase. In other words, like this. If and this is even in Yerushalayim. So a person has their Meiser Sheni money. They go up to Yerushalayim, and there's a horse that they want to buy. Horse is not a kosher animal. So they want to buy the horse. So now, if somebody would buy the horse, now the seller knows that the money for the horse, the Meiser Sheni money, is not going to transfer to the horse. The Kedusha of Meiser Sheni, the status of Meiser Sheni, is not going to transfer to the horse because you can't eat the horse. So it's going to remain on the money. So there, the seller will know that he has to treat the money as Meiser Sheni. Now that's very similar to this woman. We said a woman knows that the money maintains the status of Meiser Sheni. And that's why you can do Kiddushin with it, according to Rabbi Yehuda. It will work, because we're not worried that she's going to misuse it. She knows it's Meiser Sheni. So in the case where you're buying, where somebody's selling an animal, he also knows that the money that he receives will stay as Meiser Sheni, and he'll use it properly. But yet the Mishnah says that, no, we don't allow such a sale. So we're still concerned that it's going to be misused. And not only, and therefore, there's a requirement that the buyer who gave his money, he has to actually redeem the money that he gave. And he says, that's what it means, Yochal Kenegdan, Imlakav Yochal Kenegdan. What it means is he has to take his own money and say that wherever the money that went to the seller, wherever the money that went to the seller, it should be flipped for this money. So you're not allowed to, I don't know if I said before whether the sale works or not. The sale does work. You're not allowed to buy it. You're not allowed to buy a non-kosher animal or a slave or land with Meiser Sheni money. And that's apparently a concern that the seller is not going to treat the Meiser Sheni money like Meiser Sheni money, even though he should know that the Kedusha didn't transfer. But if he did, if you did make such a sale, so then the buyer, is responsible for the money wherever it is, and he has to take his own money and say that that money, which is in the hands of the seller somewhere, I'm going to transfer its holiness to my money, and now the money that I have is back to being, whatever money I have is back to being Meiser Sheni. But the point of this is that we have this concern, even though the seller should know that the money is Meiser Sheni money, we still don't want this. We still don't like this situation. We're afraid he'll misuse it. So a woman who receives Meiser Sheni money for Kiddushin, we should have the same concern. So the Gemara says, "Elahacha b'isha chavera askinan deyada." We have to say we're talking about a woman who is a chavera. A chavera means she really knows what she's talking about. She's a woman who's very well versed in all the halachos, and that's a person who we can be confident that she's going to use the Meiser Sheni properly. That's where the Kiddushin would work. But if it's a woman that doesn't really know how to treat Meiser Sheni, then actually the Kiddushin wouldn't work. And the case of the sellers would also be, I guess, people, or maybe there's a low plug there, maybe we just say across the board, you're not allowed to sell it, because we're concerned of what type of person might end up with the Meiser Sheni money, so you cannot use Meiser Sheni money to buy non-kosher animals, slaves, and land, even in Yerushalayim. Okay, now the Gemara is going to examine the last line there. Amar Mar, the master said, we just said in this Mishnah, Im lakach yochal kenegdan. If he did sell it, if you did have one of these sales, then the buyer has to take his own money, we said, and redeem the money wherever it might be. Ask the Gemara, V'amai, why do we say that in this case? Yachzru damav l'mekomam kiyasam. Why don't we say we cancel the whole sale? Like we did previously. In a previous case, we said that, that if a person takes their Meiser Sheni money and buys an animal that he doesn't intend to be a karban, then the whole sale is void. So why over here do we not say the same thing? Why in this case where he bought a non-kosher animal, let's say, instead of saying the sale is void, we say he has to use his money and redeem the money wherever it might be, the Meiser Sheni money and transfer that Kedusha back to his own money. Why don't we just say, cancel the whole sale? So Amar Shmuel, so Shmuel said, top of Nun Vav Amud Beis, 56b, Kishe Barach. The case is where the seller fled. So that you can't cancel the sale. He's not around anymore. If he would be around, indeed, we would cancel the sale. But he's not here anymore. Says the Gemara, V'taima de Barach. It sounds like the only reason is because he ran away. Halo Barach. But if he didn't run away, Kansinan Lemocher, we give a kanas to the seller. We penalize the seller and we cancel the sale, and he has to give back the money. Ask the Gemara, we should give the kanas, we should give the fine to the buyer. Meaning, we have two choices here. One choice is we cancel the sale. That's penalizing the seller. The other choice is we tell the buyer that you have to use your money to redeem the money wherever it might be. That's penalizing the buyer. Now, whose fault is it here? Seemingly, it's the buyer's fault. It's his Meiser Sheni money. So, why are we saying that if he didn't run away, we're saying then if he didn't run away, if he's still here, we cancel the sale. Why? That's penalizing the seller. We should penalize the buyer. So the Gemara says the reason is because it's not the mouse who steals, rather it's the hole that steals, which is an interesting idea, but it's suggesting that if the seller wasn't here, then the buyer wouldn't have done anything wrong. So it's the seller's fault. So that's why the seller gets penalized. Ask the Gemara, what do you mean? If there was no mouse, what did the hole do? That the mouse hit it and the hole didn't do anything, it's the mouse's fault. So in this case, it's not, if there was no buyer, the seller didn't do anything, it's the buyer's fault. So the buyer should be penalized. Says the Gemara, Mistavra, what's logical is, what's logical is wherever the Meiser Sheni is, wherever the Isser is, wherever the prohibited item is, that's where we place the kanas. That's where we place the fine. The reason why we would fine and penalize the seller and make him nullify the sale is because he's the one who has the Meiser Sheni right now. So wherever the Meiser Sheni is, that's where we would insert the penalty. But if that's not an option, he's not here anymore, so then we would make the buyer redeem the Meiser Sheni money with his own money. Okay, we'll hold there, pick up with the new Mishnah next time.